So it was December 24th, 2019. I was in Ushuaia, Argentina, and it was my first Christmas alone ever. And I was going to a party that my Airbnb host had invited me to. But when I got there, all I really wanted to do was just go home and cry, frankly. They were so kind to me and they gave me lots of food and tried to make me feel comfortable, but no one spoke English, and it kind of felt like I was in a fishbowl where all I could hear was the laughter echoing around me, but I couldn't access the people. I felt so disconnected and so alone. And I noticed I started to get overwhelmed and hot just from the discomfort and just not wanting to be there. And this whole party was supposed to like make me feel better. That's why I went, because I thought I don't want to be alone on Christmas. But it made me feel way, way worse. How I ended up here in Ushuaia, Argentina, of all places, was because I had moved abroad and changed my career about a year earlier, to find my people, because I had this deep sadness, this deep loneliness, and want for people to see inside of me and to say that they were okay with what was inside of me. And I told myself if that happened, I would just be magically free, from this deep lurking voice deep below that said that I don't deserve to be alive. So my travel career started with, I did a year abroad with Remote Year, which is a travel program. We did 12 countries in 12 months. It sounded like the dream. You were going to the beach on a Tuesday at 10 a.m., boat hopping, island hopping, all over. However, I just ended up back in the same old patterns of getting in a relationship really quickly as just a cheap and dirty band aid to not make me have to feel and deal with my loneliness. And so, as I was walking home from this party back to Argentina that I escaped from, I started to feel now panicked because I had no work for 2 weeks. I had no desire to do everything. I was exhausted. And I'd never spent that much time with myself without something to do. And there was a voice, that voice in my head got really loud and it was starting to feel unbearable. And I wasn't sure how I was going to make it through that time. So I forced myself to meditate. And I did a little bit of meditation before, but this was the first time I really sat down with my body. And I noticed I did a laying down meditation, and I was laying there, and my body just started to like twitch like that aggressively. Every few seconds, it kept going like this. I'm like, what is happening? Am I having a stroke? Am I dying? And initially, I was kind of freaked out by it. And as I kind of played with it more, it started to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it just kind of settled down. And after that, all the colors looked brighter. I remember taking a shower and I was fascinated by the bubbles and the reflection. And I was like, what just happened? What happened? And then I had kind of a light bulb moment of, is my loneliness and my disconnection connected to my body? Are this related? So I became obsessed with learning about trauma in the body. I read The Body Keeps Score. I did all sorts of body work, from craniosacral work to acupuncture to biomagnetism, did all sorts of meditation, yoga. I had been in talk therapy, went back into talk therapy, and I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And all of that, like so many of these tools, really helped me cope and learn about my patterns, but it didn't fix the underlying issue. I still was repeating the same patterns and I was still lonely. And I was like, what's going on? What am I doing wrong? And physically, as I started to dig in more and become aware of my body, I started to feel much worse. I started to have chronic fatigue. I was constantly low energy. At that point, I was working out of my bed on my laptop. I was watching TV, eating bad food. Everything just seemed like so much energy to do anything. And I was like, why am I going backwards? And there was so much guilt because I didn't have to work that much. I was only working a few hours a day. And I was so privileged to have all this time, yet I couldn't do anything with it because I was so exhausted. And it was just this vicious cycle that I was stuck in. And so while I was there, I was in Ecuador, and one morning I decided to go for a hike. I had the energy. I'm like, let's do it. We got the energy. And so I'm walking through this beautiful rural area in Ecuador. There's this beautiful mountain range, green, lush. And I start to go up the trail, and I'm just kind of noticing around. And I have this voice pop into my head as I'm thinking about my job, and thinking about, the people there and really struggling with the relationships and just really not feeling great about what I was doing. And I just had this voice come up like, what if you quit? I was like, no, 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 I can't do that. I don't know what I'm doing. Why would I do that? And it came back stronger. It's like a kind of a quiet, warm tingling, like, what if you quit your job? And I was like, what if I quit my job? And it was like such a slight shift in perspective. And I was like, oh, oh. And I just had this gut feeling like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So I did, and I ended up back in Mexico City. And the first week there, after I left my job and it was all done, was amazing. I was going out with all sorts of people, going to all these different meetups, meeting people, eating out, going to all these live music. And I was like, yeah, this is what I want to be doing. This is this life. I'm like engaging in life again. That's so cool. And then I got food poisoning, bad food poisoning. My liver actually started to shut down. I almost had to go to the hospital. So I was bedridden for about a week. And during that time, I started to get a very different perspective on what that experience had actually been. And it was more of that I was just so overstimulated with everything that I didn't notice that it actually was even more disconnecting to be among these people and to do these things that was such a surface level. And it didn't help with my loneliness and all. It felt really shallow. And I was like, oh no. Then, like, and that looking question came up. If other people aren't the thing that's missing, what is it? And that led me into a big shame spiral because I just quit my job. I had no plans or energy to really do anything. My body was in so much pain. I'm like, well, what do I have going for me right now? Everything's bad and everything's terrible. Like, I was like, ah. So in the midst of the freak out, I put on my coaching hat and I was like, well, what can I do now that I wouldn't be able to do while I was working? I had quite a list, but the main one that stood out was wanting to do a silent meditation retreat, a longer one. And I ended up finding out about darkroom meditation retreats, which is like a silent retreat, but you're alone in a dark room and you don't leave. And the reason we do this is not just to be crazy, but because it allows your brain to reduce melatonin, which holds a lot of cortisol from the sleeping, and it allows your brain to create DMT naturally, which is the same active ingredient in ayahuasca, so that you're able to go into repressed memories, trauma without the overwhelm experience. I'm like, yep, sign me up, nice and intense, like I like it. And so I was supposed to do 7 days. Get out, go back for 7 days. And my whole plan was to work on self-love because the guy that was leading it was like, yeah, you can get that. And sure, you can make that happen that time. Like, all right, well, this is going to be it. We're going to just do it. And this has to be it. Because at that point, I was feeling like, this has to be it. If this doesn't fix it, like, I don't have anything else. Like, I'm going to give up because I really don't have anything else. So this has to be the thing. So instead of just doing the 7 days, I stayed in for 60. 660, yes, 60. Crazy, I know. But the reason I stayed in so long was because I felt like it wasn't working. I had been promised this experience with melatonin and DMT, and it just was like nothing's happening. It just felt really mundane a lot of the time, and I was doing some good inner work as well, but it was like I could have done this outside of a dark room. And I kept feeling like, well, maybe I just need more time. I need more time. And they actually ended up pulling me out of the dark room because I wanted to go for another month, so 90 days. And they're like, no, calm down. And I was angry when I got out because I had been through all this pain and discomfort. My body was physically really in pain because it was releasing so much. There was so much tension. I was meditating all the time. It was not a comfortable experience. And while it was a helpful thing I could see at that moment to sit with discomfort, it still was like, I'm nowhere close to this self-love thing. Like, Why did I do this? What do I do now? So I was kind of angry. And about 2 weeks after I got out of the dark room, I was walking back from the beach back to my apartment, and I just noticed I was irritated. And I also noticed all of a sudden I wanted Hostess cupcakes, which I hadn't had since I was a teenager. And I wanted to listen to Machine Gun Kelly, which for me is like a reminder of like my angsty teenage years, but like the modern version. And I was like, huh, those are both very specific things. And then I started to see like, oh, irritated, cupcakes, Machine Gun Kelly. I feel like I'm actually embodying that version, that teenage version of myself. And I never felt it that clearly before, where I was able to observe it, but not get overwhelmed by it. And I was like, huh. So when I came home, I was like, well, let's see if we can explore and expand this further. So I got out and like kind of digged around and found some music from high school and started playing it. And as I did, I noticed all those feelings, that deep loneliness, that not wanting to be alive, start to come out. And I felt, though, while it was there, a sense of separation from it, of not being taken over. And I was like, huh, I got kind of curious. And that turned into actually a nightly routine where I started to make it kind of like a ceremony where I would light candles, I would get whatever foods felt like that version of myself wanted, that part of myself. I would get blankets so it was comfortable, curate the music, and I just got really curious about what is this version of me? What does it want? What does it need? Why is it here? It's not random. And initially, as I was doing that, it just wanted me to be there and listen. And then after about like 2 weeks of doing it, I got this strong urge to want to tell my story about my relationship with not wanting to be alive. And so I made a post about it. And immediately, once I pushed the publish button on the video that I wrote, I just felt an immediate drop in tension. Like it just went, it's gone. I was like, should I not move? What did I do? How did that happen? I was like, did it stick? And it's good. But I didn't know what happened. And what had happened, which I figured out years later from training in the somatic world, is beliefs, thoughts, past events, trauma become stuck in our nervous system and our body and on repeat, like the same beliefs. I'm not enough. I'm afraid of failure. The same events. You replay those conversations in your head. They get stuck because they're incomplete, unfinished. And when we complete what needed to be done, figuring out what the reparative action was, in my case, the story needed to be told, the energy went away, right? And fast forward to now, about 3 years later, I learned that while I felt like I was starving for external connection, and not feeling like I was getting enough support, what I actually was going on was that my nervous system, my body was just overwhelmed capacity wise. I was carrying so much and I was too afraid to feel any of it. So I had locked a lot of it away into these little shame corners. And so I was dissociated and disconnected from myself deeply. And by restoring that connection through being able to go in and to feel these parts, see why they were there, be curious, they released. And I also was able to finally feel safe inside of myself and to feel deep connected with myself, which allowed me to show up in relationships in the way that I wanted to be. Because before I just didn't have the capacity. I was so caught in my own repetitive narrative of pain that I just couldn't see anything else. Like I was in a dense fog. And now I'm not going to say it's perfect. I'm still very much working on being close to people. It is still very hard for me to have intimate relationships. But I do feel much more alive. I can feel the world much more fully. I have a sense of grounding and safety in myself, rooting there. So it feels like kind of I'm anchored in, so I can go out and try in the world and experiment because I know I have that safety and I'm able to respond versus react. And now, with this 8+ years of personal and also professional work and teaching, I now feel a certain responsibility to help other people with what I've learned, that a lot of this is just a kind of a switch in perspective in terms of how healing actually happens. It's not a cognitive process, it's a physiological response in our bodies, which is what trauma is, and therefore it needs to be restored in the same way. So I really feel like that anyone has the ability to heal, that you have what you need to heal. You don't need to be told what you need, or like how the best way for you is to heal. You need to be shown internally what's there. How do you access those resources so that you can then guide in terms of what's important to you and what do you long for, because that's in our bodies, not in our minds. And then there's no one modality or thing that's the answer. It's always a combination of things. Somatic work was the big opening thing for me, but there's a lot of other things along the way. So anyone that promises one thing being a magic bullet, it doesn't work that way. Trauma is so complex in its manifestations, but as often is really the missing piece. So if you've done a lot of work and you find yourself being like, I know this intellectually, but like I feel differently, it feels like a part of me feels differently, or you find yourself getting really triggered a lot and can't explain why, it's most likely something in your physiology that needs to be completed, which is a very different shift in perspective. If you want to learn more about that, there is plenty of content on my website. You can also do a quick search about somatic experiencing, sensory motor, and Haikumi. But thank you for listening to my story about how I got here, and I hope this was helpful, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching.